The Pelicans have agreed to a deal to trade Anthony Davis to the Lakers for Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, Josh Hart, and 3 first-round picks, including the number 4 overall in the 2019 draft, league sources tell ESPN.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_Beeble, a non-scheduled podcast here of course with the news that Anthony Davis has been traded to the LA Lakers. It won't be a long podcast, just a short little bit of information here. So Michael Bolton.
Let's get to it.
Let's get to it indeed. At the start of the show I mentioned what the deal was. Adrian Wojnarowski reporting that Anthony Davis has gone to the Lakers from the Pelicans in exchange for Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, and Josh Hart, the number 4 pick in this draft. And then the rest of the picks, it's a little unclear. We've had reporting that there's some pick swaps involved in this. We don't know if those pick swaps are what's included in these 3 first-round picks. So is it number 4 this year and then 2 future firsts? Is it like a Brooklyn Nets to Celtics deal where the Lakers give up 2019, 2021, 2023 first-round picks and then pick swaps in 20 and 22? We're not really sure exactly how that all goes down. It looks like it's going to be 3 first-rounders and at least multiple swaps as well, plus those 3 players. You can have issues with these guys like Brandon Ingram and Lonzo Ball and Josh Hart as not being elite type players, and yeah, they've struggled through their first couple of seasons. I think it's a pretty strong haul though for the Pelicans, adding as well the number 4 pick into that. The Lakers jumping up into the lottery, of course, helped this deal go down. But there is a lot here to unpack, especially from a fantasy point of view, with plenty of moves more to come. At this point, the Lakers, though, have been installed as favourites for the 2020 NBA title, which is absolutely bonkers insane to me. Their roster has nobody at this stage. Now, yes, they could get some space to sign someone like Kemba Walker. Maybe they're getting Kawhi Leonard. Maybe it's Jimmy Butler. But it's still a roster that has LeBron. It has Anthony Davis. It has Flaming Mo Wagner. It's got the future MVP Kyle Kuzma. It's got Isaac Bonga. And it's got Jamario Jones. That is the roster at this point. Now they have the unrestricted guys to bring back: KCP, Rajon Rondo, the Moose, Mike Muscala, Lance Stevenson, Reggie Bullock, JaVale McGee, Tyson Chandler. But whether they bring these guys back, especially those players on one-year deals who they don't have bird rights on, it's going to be a little bit of a tough ask. They have $74 million in guaranteed salary already on this roster, making their ability to get to max cap space. They have to still maneuver things around with the minimum roster holds and charges and all those sort of things on there. They still need to be able to maneuver to get these guys in. Maybe they bring back D'Angelo Russell, who knows? But I just don't think we should look at this team and go, yeah, they are guaranteed to be an absolute lock. You'd say they're a lock for the playoffs. I feel okay about that at this point. But losing those 3 depth pieces, Lonzo, Ingram and Hart, replacing them with Anthony Davis is huge. But then what else do you do in this roster? Can Pelinka find players that fit around these guys? His track record from last season would say absolutely not, because the players that they put around LeBron James was a disaster with Rondo and with Beasley and with Stevenson and those sort of guys. Nothing worked out in that sort of regard. For fantasy value for Anthony Davis, I think LeBron and Davis will be able to decently coexist. I do think that this takes Davis probably out of the number 1 discussion. Guys, big men that have played with LeBron in the past, Kevin Love, Chris Bosh, they have seen significant drops in their overall production. But in saying that, those guys aren't the player that Anthony Davis is, and they were also third options in those teams, where Davis comes in and is the number 2 option. He just won't have the ball in his hands quite as much. LeBron is going to have the ball in his hands the majority of the time. I think Davis is still going to be a pretty strong first-round pick. I think LeBron's value stays relatively the same at that end of the first-round level where he was this year. And I don't think we're looking at Davis as the number 1 guy necessarily, but out of the top 4, I think that the first round of fantasy drafts next year is going to be crazy. With the injuries in Golden State, does Steph take a step up? What does Giannis do? Can his late season shooting continue to improve? James Harden, he's still got that in him. Do other players take steps up? Or some of those other guys, like Damian Lillard, I'm not sure he's got that extra step to go. Does Karl Anthony Towns elevate and become the number one player? Does Nikola Jokic step up further and become the number one guy? Or can Davis still do that? I think he does take a little bit of a hit here, Anthony Davis, in LA with LeBron. It's not massive, and so much of his value, though, Davis, is blocks, it's getting steals, it's being a rebounder, and he's still going to be able to do those things alongside James. The efficiency will still be there. I think he'll still score a bit, so I don't think it's a huge hit, but he's not going to be a 100% lock to be that number one overall player. But this roster's still got a lot of changes to go. If, say, someone like Kemba does come, or if they somehow manage to get Kawhi, then that does change a lot of things, because that's another player who's going to have a high usage. And in those LeBron James teams, does Davis then by default become that third guy because he's a player that is so dependent on others getting him the ball? Maybe that he's not a guy, and he's a high usage guy, but everything was centered around him with the Pelicans. In LA, it won't be centered around him as much, so that's, I guess, a little bit of concern there from the fantasy value. But the Lakers made that deal. I still worry that I don't think it's going to push them into championship contention, personally. I still think there's a lot to go here. A lot to go here with this with this roster. Other things can happen. I have limited faith in them really putting together a strong roster, and I think it's going to be really top heavy with very little happening at the back end. Kuzma's going to need to take big steps up. He's going to need to learn to shoot again. He's going to have to move the ball. He's going to have to be able to take a lower usage role as well with Davis around. He's going to have to improve his defense. There's a lot that needs to happen with this Pelicans team. For the guys going to, not Pelicans, for the Lakers team, for the Pelicans, really interesting stuff. Assuming Jrue Holiday stays, his value, I think, skyrockets. I think he is a pretty clear mid-second round player. I think that Lonzo is going to go back to, I think he's going to be a top 40 guy, maybe top 30, and if he was top 20 by the end of the season, I wouldn't be surprised. And you can tell me, he can't shoot, and that's true, he can't, but he is a great rebounder, and he's going to get tons of rebounds. He's going to get a lot of assists. He's going to get steals. He's going to block shots. He's going to play a lot of minutes there alongside Jrue Holiday. Zion, I think, is probably going to be, he's going to have a chance for a top 30 finish, I think, next season in New Orleans as that number one pick. The pick number 4 is an interesting one, what they do in that area. Do they go with someone like DeAndre Hunter, who can play up a position? Because they now have Jrue, they have Lonzo, they have Josh Hart, the hitman, in that backcourt as well. There's Brandon Ingram playing the 3, or do they look to bring Jarrett Culver in at pick number 4, or does somehow RJ Barrett fall, or do they take a flyer on Cam Reddish, someone else to play the 3 as a 2-3-4 switchy type of a player? There's lots of options there. I think Julius Randle is probably going to leave the Pelicans, but now that's not so certain. They don't have a center at this spot. Do they look to bring Christian Wood back, not to develop him full-time as a starting center, but to at least bring him into the rotation? Check Diallo, where Alvin Gentry hates him. Jaleel Okafor's there. There's still a real big opening there to play alongside Zion. I don't think you'd want to play Julius Randle as the full-time starting center. There's still a big hole there. I think Lonzo's going to have a really big year. And again, if the percentages even become anywhere remotely normal, and his field goal percentage and three-point percentage did improve, it's if his free throw percentage is able to get back up, I think that we're looking at some really big numbers for Lonzo next season. Same with Jrue. And then Ingram, can he finally have a good year? He's had years where he flashes things. Injuries have definitely been a concern with him. He doesn't have to worry about the situation of sharing that ball with LeBron, same as Lonzo. So I think his assists are going to go up. He's going to, I think he is going to have his first top 100 season, Brandon Ingram, heading into his 4th year. The percentages are the concern with him, same with Lonzo, same with the shooting. But I think he can get the assist numbers back up. I think that he can get a little bit more in the scoring. Maybe I don't think he pushes to 20 points per game, but it wouldn't be crazy to see him and Jrue, or Zion and Jrue, all get to 20 points per game. Not all 3 of them probably, but all 3 of them probably over 17 points per game. I think that's a realistic opportunity there. Of course, it hurts guys like Etuan Moore and Solomon Hill, but they're not players who have any sort of fantasy impact. I think it also really limits the chances of Lord Alfred Payton returning to this squad. It limits Darius Miller and him returning to this squad. Ian Clark, any value Frank Jackson had, Kenrick Williams, they're all really limited now. They were limited players in the beginning, so getting some players who are upgrades. Ingram's an upgrade on Moore, on Miller, on Williams. Lonzo's an upgrade on Ian Clark, on Frank Jackson, on Alfred Payton. These are upgrade players, and I do believe Lonzo is an upgrade on Alfred Payton. Zion coming in at the 4 there, yes. Losing Anthony Davis is huge, but I think the Pelicans did well. Plus, from what it appears like, they're setting themselves up with those 3 first-rounders. This one's going to be good. The next 2 might not be good. They also might be okay. Who knows what happens with LeBron? Does he decline? Does Davis get hurt again? Who knows what happens with the rest of this roster? And then those pick swaps, we all thought that when Brooklyn and Boston made that trade, oh, look at this, the Nets are pushing themselves in, getting Pierce and Garnett, they're going to be a championship contender. And then all those picks and pick swaps turned out being really high. And I'm not saying that's going to be the case here, but as we've learnt so much with the NBA, is nothing is guaranteed. The Warriors were guaranteed to win a title. The NBA was over. There was no point watching. And of course, they didn't win. And I tweeted this out and I got a lot of traction on that tweet. Oh, of course, only because of injuries. And that is literally my point. Anything can happen at any point. You cannot say that anything is guaranteed. Oh, there's no point watching. No one can win. Oh, and then the replies to that are, oh yeah, but if they didn't get hurt, then we know they would have won. You don't know. You literally don't know anything because you can predict, you can assume, you can say it's likely. And I said I think it is likely the Warriors win earlier in the season, but it isn't guaranteed because many, many different things can happen. The Warriors proved beatable at times this season. The Clippers took them to 6 games in the first round of the playoffs. We saw the Rockets take them to 6 as well. They swept the Blazers, but they were always going to happen there. So anything can happen, and that's what I'm saying here over the course of the next 5-6 years in LA. Who knows how these draft picks pan out? By the time they get to the end of those 5 or 6 years, Zion Williamson is going to be pushing himself up into being a real NBA star, probably earlier. They'll have their own picks, which might be low for the next couple of years. They could trade Drew and get a package at some point as well. I think this is almost as good of a deal as the Pelicans could have looked to get here. Getting that number 4, although it's not an ideal pick, you would love to have got pick 2 to go along with pick 1 in this draft, but getting some more assets, accumulating, just getting more hits at things, which could turn into great picks. They might be the 29th pick or the 28th pick. We don't know at this point, but it is worth getting those options, seeing what you can do with Lonzo, seeing what you can do with Ingram, hoping both of those guys stay healthy, which they haven't been able to do. But there is a lot here, a lot still to play out, of course, with free agency, with the draft done in a week. Next week on the show, we're going to have a lot more draft stuff, a couple more draft guys coming on to talk prospects, another mock draft with the Basketball Monster guys, hopefully. And then, of course, the NBA draft at the end of the week. That will do it for today's little, I hate saying emergency pod, but out of schedule pod, unscheduled pod to do with this Anthony Davis trade. Really interesting stuff for both teams. The trade is done. We can worry about that being finished now. And then there's all the other bullshit intrigue across the NBA that is going to happen over the next 6 weeks or so. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Adrian Wojnarowski.